My latest speech wherever I go is to invite people to come to Bangladesh and see how to tackle climate change. If you want to work in adaptation and you want to see it in action, you have to come to Bangladesh. It's not happening in London, it's not happening in New York or Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard, it's happening in Dhaka. My name is Saleemul Huq. I'm Director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development, which is based at the Independent University Bangladesh in Dhaka, Bangladesh. I started working on climate change in the early 90s when I was living in Bangladesh. I was running a research NGO called the Bangladesh Center for Advanced Studies, where we did quite a lot of work on environmental issues but hadn't done anything on climate change until then. And I was first invited to participate in one of the early studies on the impacts of climate change. And I've become more and more interested in that. I became a lead author in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change on Adaptation. And since then I've been working on adaptation at national level, at local level, and at urban level as well. Well, resilience generally tends to have a very positive connotation to it, but it doesn't always have to be positive. In fact, just to cite two examples, criminal gangs can be extremely resilient. The mafia is extremely resilient. If you look at what's happening in Mexico right now, they are more powerful than governments and more resilient than governments indeed. Corruption can be very resilient. Corruption is very, very difficult to eliminate and remove. Even in the most developed countries, there still remains corruption. So there are some bad things that are extremely resilient as well. But hopefully we can have the countervailing good things becoming more resilient in future. One of the fundamental aspects of a resilient city is how do normal, poorer citizens of that city fare? What kind of facilities are there for them? What kind of activities can they do? And obviously it varies enormously from a developing country to a developed country, but even in the poorer developing countries that I lived in, the cities I lived in, Karachi, Jakarta, Nairobi, there was a quality of life even for poor citizens which was actually quite good. People were happy, people were able to participate in economic activities, they went to school, I went to school with kids there. It was a normal, happy city life, and to me that is one of the aspects of resilience, even though by and large they were poor and some of them were very poor. But nevertheless, that wasn't the most important aspect of the city. The city was something that was vibrant. Dhaka city has changed enormously during my lifetime. I've lived there for parts of my lifetime, and I've visited there for the other parts. And every time I visit after even a year's space, something has changed, something is different. Buildings have come up in places where they weren't before, flyovers have been built, but the problem still remains. So it's always catching up. The infrastructure is never enough to cope with the rapid increase in population and the rapid use of different services. The climate resilience, particularly of the slum dwellers, the poorer citizens in the city, is probably the greater concern, or should be the greater concern, for city managers and mayors and people in charge. Bangladesh, I think, has evolved in the climate change space from initially being recognized as one of the most vulnerable countries. It still remains one of those, but it's rapidly becoming one of the most resilient countries at the same time. One often thinks of resilience and vulnerability as opposites of each other. A country or a place that is resilient is less vulnerable, and one that's more vulnerable is less resilient. Bangladesh is the exception to that rule. It's both vulnerable and resilient. The people have a long history of combating climatic events and other kinds of events, and every time they get hit, they get up and they start all over again. And that's an extremely important and powerful characteristic of the people of Bangladesh that gives them the resilience to fight many kinds of calamities. And in the case of climate change, they're moving up the resilience ladder very, very fast. I am very proud of what my country has been doing, all the way from the Prime Minister to the cabinet ministers to the scientific community, the media who've been doing a lot of work on this, the private sector, and indeed just the ordinary citizens, farmers, the people working in the street. Even rickshaw pullers in Dhaka know about climate change. If I had $1 million to spend on making a city more resilient, and I'll take my city, Dhaka, as a case study, then being a researcher, I would invest it in ensuring that we are learning from what we're doing, and in particular bias that in favor of the most vulnerable citizens in the city. The rich can take care of themselves, the poor can't. So we should bias whatever our planning exercises are, our knowledge systems are, decision making are in favor of the poorest, and $1 million would go quite a long way in terms of generating good knowledge and good science to support the most vulnerable communities. It wouldn't pay for them to become less vulnerable, but it would influence decisions that would be made to make them less vulnerable and the city more resilient.